All right, today I want to tell you a story. How many people have heard of the three body problem? Odds are pretty high that you've at least heard of it in passing, recently anyway. But for those that haven't, it's a science fiction Netflix series originally based on a very famous and widely renowned Chinese novel. It's actually a collection of books. Three Body Problem is the first of a series, but recognizing this font of potential, if you will, long before Netflix was ever involved, a man named Lin Shi, a Chinese billionaire, set his sights on the story as he decided to try and purchase the rights. I should clarify here, in case the gravity of all this fails to come through properly. By some accounts, Three Body Problem is, quote, potentially the most valuable entertainment IP ever produced in China, end quote. That's no small thing, and for over a decade prior to this, the rights had been passing between studios for ever increasing sums of money, cultivating a sort of mythical status to this fictional universe. Lin Shi, now deceased, sadly, having long dreamt of bringing this potential blockbuster story to a mainstream international spotlight, was the original founder of a very successful company called Yuzu Games. After setting his sights on this very particular goal, one which would be extremely difficult by any metric, he set about acquiring the necessary rights to do so, immediately enlisting the help of a man named Shu Yao. Shu Yao, at the time, was a lawyer working at Yuzu Games, widely regarded for his legal expertise and strategy, but also viewed as rather quiet and somewhat humble. Having been given the task of acquiring and expanding the rights to Three Body Problem, he sprang into action and seemed to execute an extremely favorable deal structure, from what I can tell, at a price of just 10 million Chinese yuan, roughly $1.4 million American, which was a baffling price tag for such a valuable piece of intellectual property that had changed hands so many times. This was, at its core, an extremely exciting venture for the pair of businessmen who envisioned some sort of Marvel-esque media universe built on the world of Three Body Problem, which would then, by proxy, bolster credibility and interest for other Chinese-based science fiction projects down the line. Now, this goal was obviously very, very ambitious, but having initially acquired and expanded the rights by an impressive feat of legal mysticism, according to some, Shu Yao seemed like a perfect partner to help pull it off. Leaning into that partnership, Lin Shi decided to make Shu Yao the CEO of a Yuzu Network subsidiary firm called Three Body Problem Universe. This company would be in charge of securing partnerships, working on media projects, and basically distributing the story as far and wide as they possibly could on the way to financial, even cultural success, similar to how Disney operates Marvel Studios, or how AMC even is attempting to branch out with The Walking Dead. Unfortunately, the optimistic enthusiasm and idealistic anticipation quickly died. Over the course of half a decade, Three Body Problem Universe, the Yuzu Network subsidiary firm governed by Shu Yao, burned through almost $100 million with very little to show for it. They managed to create a relatively lackluster movie, which had never been widely published and was referred to by critics as unworthy of international Chinese cinematic standards, as well as secure a couple of video game partnerships, small ones, but the ability for Shu Yao to continue performing at such an unexpectedly high level that he had initially had was clearly gone. This outcome, sadly, was relatively likely in some respects, given that Yuzu was an online video game maker and not a feature film production company. They're actually best known for a mobile game called Game of Thrones Winter is Coming, which is indicative of how they create the bulk of their income. That is, internationally distributing mobile games based on popular IP they don't typically own. But the disappointment felt after such a meteoric start to the venture overall must have been immeasurable. Spiraling losses, continuously broken expectations, and an atmosphere that this was yet another company failing to adequately do justice to such a historic piece of intellectual property coalesced to result in a very predictable outcome: the punishment of Shu Yao. It was deemed by a committee that Shu Yao had been fiscally irresponsible, and thus he was stripped of his position as primary decision maker. A man named Howard Zhao would immediately take over, setting into motion a Netflix partnership which resulted in the very popular series we see today, Three Body Problem, that just released. But Shu Yao would be relegated to a position of uncertainty afterward. He was demoted and received a substantial cut in salary. Some reports allege that he had been receiving roughly $3 million annually before this point, which would now be cut to less than $1 million. The resulting level of shame would conceivably make it harder for him to find other employment. His previously stellar reputation had now been significantly marred, and while everything may have seemed amicable on the surface, deep down, he was determined to exact revenge for this unacceptable outcome. This is where the story goes completely off the rails into what can only be described as Hollywood in real life. See, Shu Yao was apparently a massive fan of the television program Breaking Bad. For those that don't know, although probably people will know, this is a very famous series where a high school chemistry teacher begins cooking crystal meth, which follows his then chaotic and destructive lifestyle through to its very end. Shu Yao absolutely loved this program, allegedly, and spurred by the shame and disrespect of being demoted, as well as receiving a substantial cut in salary, he set about taking revenge. He began by ordering dozens of cell phones. These cell phones would have their own distinct numbers and assist him in acquiring necessary supplies. But the shocking figure is that by some estimates, he had well in excess of 140 different cell phones with their own numbers, which he then used to carry out various different portions of his plot. Next, he created a dedicated company, which allowed him to set up an entire poison manufacturing and testing facility in Qingpu district of Shanghai. Estimates on how much this cost him or the relative size of that facility are once again rather scarce to come by, but hundreds of thousands of dollars in total were very likely dedicated to this project. At his facility, and using various different cell phones, he procured, then refined, an incredible number of poisons through dark web sources and other means, in excess of 100 different lethal sample types, according to some, proceeding to then test these poisons at his facility on various types of animals. After adequately researching whatever it was he was attempting to research by doing this, the scope of his activity is enormous, he moved from household pets to humans, carefully poisoning a couple of advanced probiotic pills, and then tricking Lin Shi's secretary into administering the pills for him. After several days, Lin Shi consumed one of the infected pills out of the bottle and immediately began feeling sick. This is where things get even more sinister, if that were possible. After being rushed to the hospital, Shanghai's Huashan Hospital to be precise, which then indicated that the primary poison he was suffering from was most likely tetrodotoxin, which is an extremely deadly neurotoxin derived from a pufferfish, Lin Shi was given a massive blood transfusion and underwent immediate surgery. These efforts seemed largely successful until it was realized that he was also suffering from mercury poisoning, which nefariously and very specifically undermined their corrective efforts to save him from the tetrodotoxin, ultimately resulting in his death. When speaking to an outlet named Caixin, sources close to the investigation said that Lin Shi had at least 5 different fatal toxins in his system, indicating that there had been an extensive endeavor, tested thoroughly in this makeshift poison lab, to compile such a lethal combination of toxins that no matter what efforts were taken, the poisoning would be fatal. Having been taken to the hospital on December 15th of 2020, Lin Shi passed away on December 25th of that same year, but it wasn't long until Chinese authorities discovered and subsequently apprehended Shu Yao, later convicting him of murder and, most recently, coinciding fairly well with the release of Netflix's adapted series, issuing him the death penalty for his premeditated plot to poison not only Lin Shi, but multiple other employees of Yuzu Games. Lin Shi's secretary had also been consuming the pills, and Shu Yao had even gone so far as to target what were perceivably 2 more employees whom he believed had wronged him, one of which was Howard Zhao, the man who had actually replaced Shu Yao as the leader of Three Body Problem Universe. While it's clear that the investigation itself has now concluded, with a sentence being handed down by Shanghai's First Intermediate People's Court, the sophistication of this plot is staggering. Yuzu culture reportedly saw a massive increase in paranoia afterward, where executives were getting regular toxin screenings or otherwise undertaking extraordinary efforts to protect themselves, owing to the fact that Shu Yao had been poisoning his enemies numerous times through different methods during a lengthy period of time between September and December of 2020. But the story itself, broadly speaking, is almost unbelievable. A piece of intellectual property that some describe as the most valuable in all of China gets acquired by a mobile video game company. A soft-spoken wonderkind lawyer ends up accelerating to a very high-level position where he gets to oversee the sale and distribution of that profitable IP. Said lawyer then gets demoted after he burned through $100 million and decides to execute an extremely twisted revenge plan using dozens of cell phones, over 100 types of poison acquired on the dark web, using a hidden manufacturing facility where he tested all this on various animals, and then poisons multiple of his co-workers, ultimately killing the company's billionaire founder with a refined cocktail of neurotoxins and other horrible substances, immediately getting caught afterwards and going to prison. All inspired, allegedly, so it seems, by Breaking Bad. The story of Netflix's Three Body Problem, the story of the story, in a sense, could be a complete drama by itself. Some media outlets have reported that the primary motivation for all of this was that Shu Yao had his name omitted from the Netflix credits, which seems a little bit reductive owing to the complexity of the story and the amount of shared history that these two men had. But regardless of what finally pushed him over the edge, Shu Yao appears to be a modern day supervillain, complete with a secret lair, a chosen method of attack, and an origin story for what pushed him down that path. I have not yet seen Three Body Problem myself on Netflix, but knowing the story behind the story, I'm certainly going to watch it, and for all the pain it has caused so many people, I do hope it ends up being good and does justice to the source material, which is obviously an extremely valuable and very influential, to put it delicately, piece of literature in China. That's it. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. There is a very short amount of time now left for the spring merchandise lines. We have a whole legitimate merchandise line for the channel now, so check that out, and the link is down below to go order that before it's gone. Also, affiliate deals, locals, and Patreon for monthly memberships if you're interested, and more. But we'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Question everything, and have a nice night.